Pro wrestling recently saw the return of somebody who was one of the biggest stars in the business about 15 or 16 years ago, a former two-time TNA World Heavyweight Champion, and I haven't heard anybody talking about it, so I'm going to talk about it. We're talking about the return of Mr. Ken Anderson. Mr. Kennedy, as WWE fans might remember him as. He's recently popped up in TNA Wrestling, and he's got a new podcast out called Mic Check, which I recommend checking out as well. He's had some guests on there like The Undertaker. And he was a guy that I always followed back in the 2000s. I was actually live for his very first pay-per-view match in WWE at Great American Bash 06 when he faced Batista. And I was there live during Eddie Guerrero's last match, which happened to be against Mr. Kennedy. And I was there live for that too. So I have a bit of a connection to this character, and I always followed him. Eventually he went to TNA. I was a huge TNA wrestling fan back during that time. And he had some really memorable matches against Kurt Angle. Two of my favorite Kurt Angle matches, a ladder match that was on Impact, and then the cage match. He was a major part of the Aces and Eights storyline as well, for good or for bad. And he had the very memorable moment when Tito Ortiz was coming out to the ring, and it just seemed like Ken Anderson was the only person doing anything interesting in that segment. He was kind of trying to save the segment with all of the faces that he was making. And a little trivia note, he was actually the wrestler who ended Aces and Eights as well in a match with Bully Ray. So Ken Anderson returned to TNA Wrestling on the September 18th edition of Impact. During Frankie Kazarian's King's Speech talking segment, Kaz originally introduced his first guest himself, and then went on to brag about all of his accomplishments as he normally does. And eventually he brought out Ken Anderson to a pretty good reaction from the crowd. We kind of learned where Ken's been all these years. We haven't seen him in a while. And he explains that he has started a wrestling school. He's actually trained Tiffany Stratton, among other people. He also introduces his wife and his kids in the audience as well. Of course, Kaz goes on to belittle Ken, talk about how he beat Ken before in a wrestling match. Eventually, Ken's heard enough. He attacks Frankie Kazarian until Jake Something comes out to make the save. And I haven't seen much of Jake Something, so he attacks Ken Anderson. Steve Maclin comes out to help set up a tag match for the next episode of TNA Impact. So then we get Ken Anderson in his return to pro wrestling, teaming with Steve Maclin versus Frankie Kazarian and Jake Something. So Ken and Steve are both two military vets, and this was on the main event of this episode of Impact Wrestling. And the main story revolves around Maclin and Kaz fighting over the TNA International title. So Anderson shows up. He looks in alright shape. He wrestled in a t-shirt. He doesn't have the bleach blonde hair anymore. And he's got long tights as well now. Pretty simple stuff in this match, some pretty basic stuff. Never really left his feet too much. We see a backdrop, an elbow, double clothesline, lots of stalling. Eventually, Kaz rakes the eyes of Anderson, and then Todd, I can't remember this guy's name, the guy who used to be Todd Phillips. Anyway, he complains about the TNA refs in kind of an awkward moment when he really goes off on how terrible they are. And then he references how Kaz beat Ken in the only Ultimate X singles match, and he also referenced the Eric Bischoff, Garrett Bischoff Lethal Lockdown match. The other announcer, Matt Ryholt, I believe that's his name, says that Kaz is the best he's ever been. And I actually got to agree. I think Frankie Kazarian is doing some really great work these days. Eventually, Steve Maclin makes a comeback. Jake Something didn't really show me too much in this match. He does do a corner spear. That's about it. He's just kind of a big guy. So Mr. Anderson then hits a really slow rolling neck breaker, an arm drag. He does do the Finley roll. He tries for the mic check, but it gets countered. Eventually he hits it. but Jake something breaks up the pin. Kaz makes a comeback. Ken kicks out of the Sabu leg drop by Kazarian. Eventually hits a clothesline to Kazarian. Macklin hits an angle slam. Mic check on Jake something. And then Macklin pins Kazarian after his KIA finisher. So I thought Ken hung in there a little bit. He looked pretty tired at the end. They didn't really do much, but I thought putting him in a tag match was probably the best way to hide any of his in-ring deficiencies at this point. But it was fun to see Mr. Anderson back in a TNA ring and just back in wrestling in general. I'd like to see him perhaps make another appearance with TNA Wrestling or even with WWE. That'd be cool to see. I think he'd perhaps make even a good commentator or just a good interviewer. I could see him working backstage, of course, as well. We already see that he's got a wrestling school and a lot of his former students already working in the business. So let me know what you guys think about the return of Mr. Anderson, aka Mr. Kennedy. Do you think we could see him possibly make a Royal Rumble appearance? It is in Saudi Arabia next year. Would he make the trip out to Saudi Arabia for that if he got the call? He says he's ready. Let me know your thoughts. And thanks again for watching. Please subscribe to my channel. This is a brand new channel where I talk about pro wrestling. Go check out some of my other videos where I've reviewed Clash in Paris, WrestlePalooza, Forbidden Door. I've got my thoughts on Hulk Hogan. And thanks again for watching, and go watch wrestling. Wrestling.